Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about the game industry going from carefree to careful. I've been in the industry since 1981. Most of you haven't even been around since 1981. My career is older than most people who watch this channel. And I've watched things change. So some of the things I'm going to talk about, they're not new. What instigated this was I was looking through my idea book. This is one of many. The others are on my shelf behind me. And I looked through them for ideas of just mechanics, settings, storylines, things I want to work on. And then I talk about them to coworkers. I will sometimes go, wouldn't it be interesting to have a mechanic like this or a setting like this or to have a story that investigates this thing? And on more than one occasion, either I or one of the coworkers will stop and go, wow, can we even do that now? Can we even talk about that now? And it's not, by the way, this isn't a conservative, liberal, left-right thing. As frequently as we think we can't talk about something because conservative people would get upset, there's similar things that liberal people would get upset about. You're just talking about that topic, but you're not talking about it in the right way. So we covered the gamut. We're being very apolitical at work. You may think, this sounds like politics. We're being apolitical. We're basically saying, can I do this? Can I tell this story now? And I wanted to talk about that here and not be political, or more specifically, I'm not going to be analytical here. I'm going to tell you some stories and you can decide what you think. Or for some of my viewers who've decided that they think correctly and everybody should think like them, you can tell people in the comments how they should think. Anyway, what started this all off was we were talking about some game ideas and I made the following comment. I don't even think some of my games could be made now. And somebody goes, what do you mean? What are you talking about? And for different reasons. Fallout is one example. To me, Fallout was about power and the corruption. That power always corrupts. No matter who gets power, no matter what their goals, their intentions, no matter how good they think they're being, power will corrupt them and it leads to bad things. But these days, people want it to be about other things, to the point where they're telling me I'm wrong. That's not what my own game was about. Or they're telling me, well, you've lost control of the narrative. It's ours now, and I'm going to tell you what it means. And I'm like, you can tell me what it means to you, but I'm telling you what it meant to me. It leads to this weird, the whole death of the author thing. Because of that, I don't think certain things could be told today, because no matter what you said you were saying, someone else would go, nope. My lens is this, and this is what you're saying. So I'm not saying it would be hard or you'd get in trouble if you tried to tell stories like that today. You literally can't. People won't accept it. It doesn't fit into their lens. They'll reject it or force it into their lens. But then there's other things, and I gave Arcanum as example of that. Arcanum, we literally wanted to tackle racism and misogyny and all kinds of discriminatory practices within the context of a fantasy game. So the fantasy world had people who acted badly, and the player could fight against that, could speak out against it, but they didn't have to, because we always gave our gamers, our players, choice and agency. But these days, you'd have to be very careful, because if you made a world that had a certain kind of victims in it and the game wasn't firmly against that, if it let you be someone who created those victims, I don't even think you could create a game like that today, which means you can't explore those ideas because you're not allowed to speak about them in any way other than that's bad. So I could make a game and go, yep, racism is bad, here it is, boom. But I couldn't make a game that had racism in it that let the player fight against the racist authorities. So that's the other kind of, I don't think I can make a game like that today because you just can't do it. And it led to me going, wow, the 80s and 90s were totally different. I've mentioned that here, it's like boom, boom, Wild West. But really what it was is both playing games and developing games was more carefree. And I like that word, because it basically means you would have ideas and think about how you could put them in a game and play around with them without worrying about being called out for being for that thing. So you could talk about racism without somebody going, you're racist. I'm like, well, actually, if you play my game, you find out that racism is the cause of all these bad things in the world. We're showing how bad racism is in a fantasy world. But I've played a lot of tabletop RPGs that influenced my games, and I have a video about that, and I'll link it. And I also played a ton of different games at Interplay after hours. I have a video linked below, and you can watch me talk about all the different games we'd play after hours at Interplay. And it made me realize that I played way more games and way more different kinds of games in the 80s and 90s than I do now. We'd often, every Thursday night when we played at Interplay, we'd play a different game. And even if we played the same game, like GURPS came in so many different settings and genres and flavors that we may play GURPS Time Travel one week, and then GURPS Horror, and then GURPS Cyberpunk, and then GURPS Far Future Sci-Fi. It was wildly different every week. I still remember in the early 90s, somebody brought a game in, and it was called Macho Women with Guns. And you basically could play all these different types of female archetype characters who were violent. That was the whole point of the game. That was its flavor. Interestingly, there was a rumor that they were making a spin-off, and the spin-off was supposed to be called Kung Fu CB Mamas on Wheels versus the Motorcycle Aztec Wrestling Nuns. I've seen people talk about it online. Like, did this really exist? Did they have this? Guys, no. This is the thing about, search engines now, is people think all information is out there, and if they can't find it, it didn't exist. Well, guess what? That funny spin-off, the Kung Fu CB Mamas, that was in a comic called Murphy's Rules. I have the collected comics. It was in a magazine called Space Gamer. And the whole thing, that whole Kung Fu CB Mama thing, comes from a joke they did. And here it is. It is a joke list errata for the game. The game never existed. The joke was, here's a list of errata for it. And the errata was things like, Page 12, paragraph 4, Boy Scouts are considered innocent bystanders, not obstacles. Or page 2, top line, delete hysterical laughter from the combat results table and replace with Chainsaw Massacre. The idea was there was no real game like that, but you would read the errata sheet and imagine what crazy game this was. I don't see stuff like that anymore. Crazy, weird, just bizarre stuff. And the question you have right now is, am I going to say whether this is a good thing or a bad thing we don't see it anymore? You decide that. You decide whether it's good or bad thing that we don't see stuff like that anymore. Guarantee some of you think it's a good thing. Guarantee some of you think it's a bad thing. Guarantee those two camps will never, ever, ever connect. What this has done, though, is it has led to a large amount of caution in the entertainment industry, and specifically in the game industry. And this is why many people go, why do we see a lot of the samey games? The characters look similar, the weapons look similar, the settings are similar, the mechanics are similar. It's all very samey. And I've tried to talk about it all boils down to cost, because it usually always boils down to money in some way. So for publishers, it's the money they're spending on the games. They don't want to be too crazy and potentially alienate people. But for the developers, we're talking about that's their career, that's their job, that's how they make money. So it's still money, but it's a different thing for the people actually doing the development. Anyway, I have 2 different videos on game developer caution. I'll put it in the description. You can go watch those. None of this is new. I don't want to talk into that, right? I don't want to dive in and talk about that. But I do want to say the whole point, the whole way this really came up, despite talking about Idea Book at work, is it led to me talking to some people about my old D&D games. And I told a story, and I'm going to tell you the story. And then when I'm done, people go, oh, that's kind of what's happening now. So here's the story. My first D&D campaign was in 1979. That's when it started. I was in high school. It was my first year of high school. I had a bunch of friends. We were all learning how to play D&D, which I had played one time with some captains in the Navy that were in my mom's Judge Advocate General office. I played once with them, saw how the rules worked. We started playing. We didn't know how you were supposed to play. So what tended to happen is we'd make characters. One of us would DM, the rest would make characters. We'd start playing with the expectation that those characters were going to die. Usually, sometimes we start at first level, so of course there was a high death rate. Sometimes we'd say, let's start at 3rd level or 5th level. One time we had a campaign, I think you started at 9th level. We'd play, and frequently someone would die. Characters would die. At some point, it could be a missed saving throw. You miss a disintegration saving throw, you're dead. You miss a fireball saving throw and you take full damage, you're dead. maybe there's a monster that the DM put in that was a little OP, or just OP for our party. Like, oh, this monster is easy to deal with if you have the cure disease spell, but none of us did, so we killed the monster and then we all died of disease. Or maybe we just make a bad choice. It's like, hey guys, we should turn back. We're low on spells. Let's do one more room. Wipe. Game over. We just thought that's how the game played. We'd laugh. We'd agree to meet next Saturday, and we'd all make new characters and do it again. Now, by college, we were only playing on some weekends and over vacation and maybe in the summer. Some of my players, because I'd turned into the long-running DM, some of my players had some survivor characters. These were player characters that had made it through that meat grinder that we had in high school, and they were now high-level characters with a long backstory of a lot of adventures they had done, and maybe they had gotten high enough that they could make strongholds, and now they had followers of their own that lived at the stronghold. You know, they were cleric with sub-clerics, or they were a fighter with mercenaries. The wizard had his wizard tower. These players became very attached to these player characters, and suddenly they were very cautious in how they played. They didn't want to do one more room. As soon as they'd used a few of their spells, they said, we got to leave. I only have 3 cure lights left. We're leaving now. So it got to the point, and I still remember this clearly, a player character had reached level 14 and was an illusionist, and they took the spell Alter Reality. And that's a wish level spell. It's a wish type spell. You can do anything you want with it. You basically make an illusion of whatever you want, and then Alter Reality makes that illusion real. So, you know, somebody in the party died. I'm making an illusion of them standing up and going, nope, that was just a flesh wound. I'm fine. Boom, reality. It's real. He wasn't killed. The player who ran that character refused to cast the spell because it caused irreversible aging. I don't know if you know, in AD&D, Wish, Limited Wish, and Alter Reality age the character irreversibly every time they cast it. It was like a year, I think. Might have been 3 years, but he would never take it, which led to the other players going, why did you even take that spell? And he goes, well, we may need it in an emergency, but he would never, ever cast it. And guess what? He never did. He never cast that spell. Now, what was interesting to me back then was watching my players grow more and more cautious. And also, because of it, have less fun the longer they played their characters. In fact, a couple players even retired their characters, never to play them again. They thought the thought of losing those characters were too much for them to bear, so they literally retired them to their strongholds and made new characters to play. And this whole thing happened over about a 6-7 year time span, from them making brand new characters every time we played to having these long-running characters who eventually became unplayable because they were terrified something bad would happen to them. And I told this story to some friends because here we are 45 years later, and that's what kind of feels like the industry is to me. Carefree is gone. Careful is here for everyone. Publishers, game developers, players. There's this carefulness. And I sometimes wonder if that carefree stuff can be regained. And I don't know. There's a lot of resistance to it. And like I said, this comes from both sides, conservative, liberal. Sometimes it's just human nature. They think there are things you shouldn't do or even say or talk about or think about because they're just bad. And so here we are. And there are games you're not going to get because there's often games you're not going to play. And this is the situation we're in. And so will things ever go back to Carefree? I don't know. We will have to see. In a way, I'm happy I got to see the Carefree time, warts and all. I'm not sure we'll ever go back to that. But anyway, I wanted to talk about that and give you something to think about without actually doing any analysis of it whatsoever. And I hope you all have a careful day.